when I started teaching the legacy classes,
Mm-hmm.
I realized that it's not really what we leave, it's how we live. And so I began to understand that how we live our life becomes our legacy. So that became my quote. That is like the thing that I really believe, because it's
Your credo.
right. Because people watch us and they learn from us. It's not what we say, it's what we do. And I'm convinced that I'll just tell you the story. One of the women in my writing group from Gilda's Club, so Gilda's Club is a resource center for people who are impacted with cancer. And so I've been volunteering there and do a writing group twice a month there. And one of the women was dying, and we went. Several of us from the class went to visit her, and she was someone who was not afraid to die. It was very interesting. She was very open to talking, and I am certainly someone who is not afraid to ask questions. And so we had an incredible conversation. There were 5 of us, and it was really very profound. And normally when you visit someone in hospice, you don't stay 3 hours, but we did. And she didn't want us to go, and we talked the whole time. And one of the questions I asked her was, Marie, how do you want us to remember you? And she thought really carefully, and she looked at me and she said, Merle, it doesn't matter how I want you to remember me. You're going to remember me the way you want to remember me. And that's when I realized that if we want to be remembered a certain way, we better be living that way.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Person You Want to Be. I am your host, Eric Teplitz. This is the final show of 2022 and the season finale for year 1 of this podcast. For this episode, I wanted to take the opportunity to go back over all the interviews I've done this year and distill from them some of the wisdom that my guests have offered about becoming the person you want to be. I've pulled clips from each of the 17 interviews, and after observing some patterns about what people said was essential for them in becoming who they most wanted to be, I've arranged these clips into 5 general categories. Those 5 categories are as follows. Number 1, tapping into your own inner wisdom. Number 2, declaring and stepping into what it is you want. Number 3, taking risks and being courageous. Number 4, finding purpose through your pain. And category number 5, tips for accessing your best self and best life. So without further ado, let's jump right into category number 1, tapping into your own inner wisdom. We'll begin with the first guest I had on the show, accomplished mountaineer and adventurer Gary Scott. Listen to what Gary has to say about slowing down, getting quiet, walking, and determining his own right path in midlife.
So somebody can have a goal to run a marathon, be a CEO, climb Everest, make $1 gazillion. But if you're not enough inside already, it's not going to change anything. And that's why some people are just, on this hamster
wheel
run. Yeah. For continually chasing stuff, and they never get satisfied. And it's and I'm probably fortunate for the time traveling that I've had, and I spend a lot of time in introspection, just thinking about stuff, and rather than running here and running there. And that's what I love about walking. And my whole life's been about walking, and it still is about walking. And taking people on walks, and I'm always getting people to slow down and just, hey, be here. Let's not talk about where you're going next week, what the last safari you were on. Look at this. look at this and be here now, and just being quiet. And I don't think a lot of people, take time for that. When I turned 50, I took 6 months off and happened to, have a beautiful place in Park City, and sat down and thought about, okay, what do I want to do for the next 50 years of my life? And I think it's a great exercise, actually, to, if you could do anything, what can you do? And I had yellow sticky pads, and I wrote different things that I liked doing or that were important to me. So I can't remember exactly, but it was, being physical, spirituality, traveling, teaching people, helping people. And I had them on a piece of paper, and I realized, I still wanted to be in the travel business, but I wanted to create something different and unique, and came up with the idea of this right path. And I wanted to keep myself on the right path and taking people on the right path. And so fortunately, the domain name Right Path Adventures was available.
What year now are we talking?
2009.
Okay.
But what's interesting is I really didn't have a place that I was excited about taking people to. And then I was living in Park City, and they have the big outdoor adventure trade show for all the companies in Salt Lake. And I went and I picked up a couple of magazines on the way out. I go for inspiration and look for ideas and meet old friends. And I was flipping through this magazine. There was an article about the Dolomites. And I'd read about the Dolomites when I was 14 years old, back in boarding school. And actually said to my girlfriend at the time, I've always wanted to go to the Dolomites. And she said, I love Italy, let's go. So we planned a trip for a month. I did a ton of research for 6 months, which was very difficult to find anything, and flew over there, fell in love with the place, and thought, man, if I love this, so the first year I had 20 people, the next year 30 people, the next year 40 people. And, so I've taken well over 100 groups, have a fully booked year this year. And, I have people say, don't you get tired of walking on the same routes? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I have different weather, different lighting, different people. And it is, and I've been all over the world. It is, to me, the most beautiful, incredible place on the planet. And I know you've been there, and I just love what I do. And I run back-to-back trips. At one point, I used to take a day off between trips, and it was like, oh, this is terrible. I'm sitting in my apartment tapping away on my laptop, so I do one trip after another, and I get a lot of private groups, a lot of families, a lot of friends, and absolutely love it. And, in each valley, there's the best hike you can do. And so I can't wait to get back. And if the Dolomites was open, because it's, a ski town, so in the winter it's skiing, then there's mud season, and then there's the summer, and then there's, winter comes in. If it was open all year, I'd live there, and I'd take people on hikes every day.
Next, we have Lynda Monk. Lynda is a social worker who currently serves as director of the IAJW, the International Association for Journal Writing. Here's what Lynda had to say about learning to trust herself via the simple practice of journaling.
Every time I'd get these impulses or, instincts of things I wanted or thought I wanted to do or needed to do, they were things that would first appear in the journal. It was in my journal that I witnessed the feeling of not being happy in my first marriage. I mean, I felt some things about that in myself, but thinking it quietly in oneself is different than committing that kind of truth or observation to the page. And then there it was again, and there it was again. It's like, okay, well, this must be true. This must be my true feelings, even though you're trying to talk yourself out of it, and trying to be rational, and no one wants to get divorced, and, you know, all of that. It just kept being there and being there. And finally I thought, look, there's got to be some really deep in my bones truth to this, or it would not keep coming out month after month, then year after year, you know, on the page. All that's left for me to do is I need to take action. And I need to trust that it's going to be the right action, because the wisdom, the guidance has come from inside myself. I've wrote those things down, and they're not just passing, they're not fleeting. And the same with moving to the island. I had visited it once. After that marriage ended, my girlfriend took me to Salt Spring. She was going to a conference in Vancouver, and she said, why don't you come with me on the road trip? You can hang out in Vancouver, and we'll go over to this place called Salt Spring. You'll love it. There's lots of artists there, and writers and creatives, and you know, she was doing what good friends do, trying to cheer me up. And because even though we take action on our truth, it doesn't mean we're not going to be gutted and heartbroken and in a heap, you know, crying on someone's basement floor. It doesn't mean we get a free pass into bliss. It means, okay, now I've done the next thing that feels right to do, and now I got to deal with that. And it's messy, and it's, you know, heartbreak's heartbreak, even if it's the right thing to do. And so, when she took me there, it was this rainy weekend. I bought a raincoat. I bought rubber boots. I remember going out on a dock in Ganges, our main village, and had this coat up, and it was pouring rain. You could barely see across the harbor. It was dense fog. It was like miserable West Coast weather. And I just remember tilting my head back and the rain coming down on my skin. I'm like, I love this place. I just, wow, I want to live in a place like this. And of course, then in my journal, it kept being on that page, this desire to move to that island. And a couple of years later, that's what I did. So the journal became something that, like a compass. It was lots of things. It was a place to vent and write about my days and catch quotes and poems and all things that inspire me. And, you know, but it was also like this companion practice that I grew to trust. And really what you're growing to trust is yourself, right? It's not some external person writing and you got to decide whether you're going to listen to them or not. You know, it's your own inner voice. As soon as I've seen something enough times in my journal, I don't spend any more time flipping around with pros and cons lists and should I do this, should I just like, I have everything I need there that's guiding me to what I need to do next. And it doesn't mean it'll be easy to go there necessarily, but I do know it's the next step.
Lastly, for this category of tapping into your own inner wisdom, we hear from Gregg Levoy. Gregg is probably best known for being the author of a wonderful book called Callings: Finding and Following an Authentic Life. In this book, Gregg looks at a variety of ways we can divine our callings in life. Listen to this unusual personal story he shares about how he discerned a calling of his own through paying attention to a certain sign that kept cropping up in his life.
I was trying to figure out whether to quit my job at the newspaper and become a freelance writer full-time. And I was driving home from work one afternoon listening to the Eagles song Desperado. So most people know the song. There's a line in there that says, "Don't you draw the queen of diamonds, she'll beat you if she's able. The queen of hearts is always your best bet." Right there, I pulled up to my house, so I turned off the car and the song, opened the car door, and stepped my left foot out onto the curb, and right at my left foot was a playing card, which I turned over, and it was the Queen of Hearts. You know, so this falls into the category of what Carl Jung called synchronicities. So meaningful coincidences, you know. And over the next 2 years, while I tried to figure out what to make of this call to be self-employed as a writer, I found 4 more Queen cards all over the country. Not just in Cincinnati where I was at the time, but all over the country, including a wilderness in called Maroon Bells in near Aspen, Colorado. out in the middle of nowhere, like miles from the nearest trail.
Like a single card, just
a single card, queen card, and which had apparently been there for a really long time. And I was thinking of having that thing carbon dated, I swear. It looked like it had been up there for years, maybe even decades. And
Queen of Hearts, or they were different?
No, they were all different suits.
Yeah.
They were all different suits. And I had one of each. And but they were all queens. And so, I just started Googling the archetype of the queen. What does the queen mean? It is the preeminent archetype of powerful feminine energy. So, you have to interpret this stuff the way you would like a dream or something. Yeah. And I just figured out that what this really kind of stunning series of synchronicities was trying to tell me was that I needed to apply the feminine mindset to this question about whether to quit my job, meaning heart, not head. Now, I realize that's a little bit plain and simple, but that's how it struck me at the time. The feminine principle would have said, go with your heart. The masculine principle was, you need a paycheck. So but again, what is orchestrating those kind of events? There's a quality of wildness to life that is profound and profoundly outside of my control or anybody's control.
Or understanding.
Or understanding, exactly. But I understood it at some gut level, which is really what it was about. It was about making gut decisions. So I just love that I had that experience, because it really cemented in my mind, oddly enough, how non-rational, I'm not going to say irrational, because, as I wrote about that story, this struck me as orchestrated by something with wits. There was intelligence to this, the fact that I kept finding only queen cards, and I've never found cards before or since, but here I have these 5 queens. So there's something to keep an eye out for in life in terms of guidance that doesn't just come from the frontal cortex.
Yeah. And, you talk about early on in callings, the importance of listening. It's really a beautifully early, or it might even be the first chapter, really, really beautiful listening, and the value of silence, and just tuning in and just kind of removing yourself from the noise that's around us everywhere all the time, so that we can actually hear what's calling us and tune into it. And your story strikes me in a certain way, like the sort of devil's advocate rationalist in me would say, okay, pure coincidence. But even still, if life is a Rorschach test, it's our responses to it and interpretations of it that indicate to us what matters to us. So even if that was pure, randomness,
right?
Your take on it was, in a sense, you could say your soul's way of making its wishes known
and making sense of it.
Right.
Because it seemed too orchestrated. I don't know how else to put it. To just be purely random. Certainly finding the one queen card after listening to the Desperado song.
That's
wild.
A little creepy.
Wow. But 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 queen cards over this period of time when I was trying to make this big life decision, that started to feel like pieces of a puzzle fitting together. It was hard for my rational brain to just sweep it to the side.
Moving on to category number 2, declaring and stepping into what it is you want. We begin with something Doug Chamberlin shared on his journey to becoming a professional screenwriter. Doug is best known for co-writing the screenplay to the hugely successful Pixar film Toy Story 2. Here's Doug.
When I was new in Hollywood, after I had done that one special, but then couldn't get arrested, when I was scrubbing the rust off of poles. During that whole period, several people told me, you should present yourself as a writer. In other words, you want to become the person that you would like to be. Well, I wanted to be a writer, obviously. And for a while there, I was telling people, I want to be a writer, or I'm an aspiring writer, or I'm trying to be a writer. And people who are already further along in the business said, you are a writer. Just because you haven't sold something, you don't need that validation. Are you writing stuff? I said, yes. You're a writer. Don't tell people you want to be a writer. You are a writer. And just thinking that way, that shift in my head helped quite a bit. I mean, Van Gogh was a painter, even though he only sold one painting his whole life. That doesn't mean he wasn't a painter. He was obviously was a painter. So
yeah, Van Gogh is definitely a painter, and Doug Chamberlin definitely is a writer. I was very moved by the story of this next guest, Ray Fauteux. Ray grew up in a highly dysfunctional household. Listen to how he describes the moment that catalyzed him into turning his life around at the age of 27. The remarkable transformation he would undergo all started after a spark of inspiration with becoming very clear on what it is he wanted to achieve.
As I got older, I was drinking pretty much all the time. And on a weekend, it wouldn't be unusual to, go through a dozen beer on a Saturday or Sunday, just to have that high, I guess. I was really going nowhere. I was going nowhere with my life. And actually, I don't know what would have happened. I think I was on the road to self-destruction, to tell you the truth. If I hadn't have made that change, if I hadn't had that life-changing moment that kind of woke me up, because I always felt I had to do something, that this wasn't working, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know. I needed a trigger point.
Yeah, that was when you happened to be sitting on the couch drinking, and you happened to be flipping the channels and stumbled upon what?
The Olympic marathon was in progress in Montreal, 1976. I remember the day perfectly, like I'm watching this race, and I remember Vladimir Sierpinski, he was East German, winning the race, and Frank Schurter was second, and I watched them come into the stadium, and 50,000 people in the stadium, and I thought, wow, that was to me so moving, right? Such an accomplishment. And I guess that's what I really wanted with my life. I wanted to accomplish something and be known for accomplishing something, and not always hiding because I didn't want people to see my family and didn't want anybody to know, becoming a loner, basically. I needed something. And that seemed to strike a chord with me. Gosh, I mean, what a feeling that must have been for them to accomplish something like that, right? It says, I wish I could do that. And maybe I could do that. And I think, I'm going to try and do that. And that's how that all evolved. So I made a commitment to myself. So this was July, I believe, the Olympics took place, 76. I made the commitment for January 1st. I wanted the significant starting point, and to me, the turn of a new year seemed to be it.
Okay.
Right? I don't know why, but that just seemed to make sense to me. And I set my goal at the Calgary Marathon.
And when was that?
It was a lofty goal because it was in May. And I started running in January 1st. So we're talking 5 months. And from being a 30-pack a day smoker and a drinker, so going from ground zero to running a marathon in 5 months. And this is where the compulsive part comes in. Because now I was starting to use that dysfunctional childhood compulsive behavior in a positive manner. I was going to turn that compulsion around and be creative with it. I was going to run a marathon.
Ray went on to complete over 30 marathons, 2 50-mile running races, and 11 Ironman triathlons. His book, Ironstruck, The Ironman Triathlon Journey, was a huge inspiration to me personally when I decided to tackle the challenge of completing an Ironman myself. So thank you once again for all the inspiration, Ray. To close out this category of declaring and stepping into what it is you want, I share with you a clip from my conversation with Daniel Maté. Daniel and his father, world-renowned physician and author Gabor Maté, began delivering workshops together in 2016 called Hello Again, a fresh start for parents and their adult children. Daniel speaks to the power of holding an intention and declaring and stepping into what it is you want, with an important caveat when it comes to relationships, which are, by their nature, a two-way street. For further context, Daniel and his father are co-authors of the recently released book, The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture, which has become a New York Times bestseller. Here's Daniel.
One of the breakthroughs I had on my most recent trip to Vancouver, which was leading up to the book release, it was a very intense time, and I was insecure. He was getting all the attention in the run up to the book release. He's the one flying off to Austin to do Rogan. I had no sense that I was going to be in demand, that my voice was going to matter, and all of my old insecurities. Again, time warp.
Yeah.
But guess what I realized on this last trip home? I don't have to stay with my parents when I'm in Vancouver. I moved to my uncle and aunt's house at one point. I was allergic. I was having stress reactions in my body. My histamines were going off the roof. I always get allergic in that house for whatever reason. I'm sure there's some dust thing, but it's also emotional. And I was like, oh, there's no shame. It's not a failure of me as the workshop leader of Hello Again to acknowledge I'd be happier if I go and stay at my uncle and aunt's house and they're out of town. I can be by myself and I can visit my parents. Or if I get a hotel next time I'm in town.
Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. It's totally intelligent.
Right.
What is my intention? My intention is to have peace in myself and have peace in my relationship with him. That particular house doesn't work as a place for us to coexist.
And you're giving both
long-term.
parties space too. Like there's time to
100%.
decompress. Yeah.
100%. So it's like realizing that some of the suffering is a function of faulty architecture in the relationship. There's old habits and structures, that seem necessary, that seem built in, but actually they're built, they're constructed, they're socially, interpersonally constructed, and they can be deconstructed if we have a different intention and set a different standard and say it doesn't have to be this way. We were talking before you hit record about how this is it's a real choice relationship. When you're an adult and you have a parent, or you're a parent, you have an adult child, you do not need them in the way that you once needed them, or you're not responsible for them in the way you were once. So if you're going to choose to engage with this, might as well create something. But what that takes is reckoning with the past with a certain degree of honesty and candor.
Yeah.
And I would say that, some of the principles of our workshop are, relationships, of all relationships, they're not 50-50. If you want to be miserable, have your relationships be 50-50. If you want to be satisfied, have it be 100-100. You know how, like, I'm looking at you right now, but I'm not actually seeing you. I'm not even seeing your image on my computer screen. What I'm seeing is a photo negative, then reconstituted on my cornea through some, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
Yeah, sure.
several levels
A projection
of
of some
abstraction
kind.
from the real you. It's like that. So the father that I'm relating to, or the mother that I'm relating to, is only in a very limited way the being that's out there. I think it's them. I'm sure that I'm dealing with them, but actually what I'm wrestling with is so much of my point of view about them. And so little of that comes from the present moment. And so much of it is shaded and determined by old stories and old dynamics. So you got to each deal with that. And you know what? Like I said, it's 100-100, which means there may not be someone on the other side who's willing to take that 100. You just got to deal with your 100. But what I'm saying is you don't need a willing partner on the other side. It is very much an inside job, and your quality of relationship starts over here with what your intention is and how much you're willing to accept that your experience is very much a function of your point of view. Now, it helps if there's another person over there who wants to shift things. Then that really opens up new possibilities for interacting. But even one person shifting, one of my little phrases that I like to say in the workshop is it takes two to tango, but it only takes one not to. But in terms of broaching a difficult conversation, I think the question is, why do you want to broach it? What's it in service of? We, at our book launch in Vancouver, a woman put up her hand. She said, I really need to heal my relationship with my parents. And I said to her, no, you don't. You don't need to. You want to. But as soon as you think you need to, like, why do you need to? And she clearly thought that somehow her in her, like she needed to redeem her past with these living parents before they passed. Well, that would be nice. But if you're pinning your healing on what happens between you and your adult parents, on whom you no longer depend, that's not a really good place to create a
It's
new
not
relationship
empowering.
from. It's not empowering. You know, you can only invite people. You could say, hey, you know what? I've been wondering about our relationship. I've been looking at how I am with you guys. I've been looking at the patterns I have in my life and the ways that I show up in this relationship and the ways that those have or haven't changed since I was a little kid. And I find myself sometimes dissatisfied after our interactions, and I find myself acting in ways that I don't understand. And I'm wondering if it could be different. I mean, it's so, and I'm just looking at that for myself. And I wonder if I could invite you into a back and forth about that, or if I could share with you what my experience is. I mean, and they will let you know by how they respond, what their level of openness is, you know, especially people who are more used to therapy and new age stuff. You go to your more conservative parents and you start bringing your language into the thing and whatever, they're just going to think you're weird.
Yeah, totally.
You want to, you know, but if they sense that what you want to do is soften towards them, and maybe there are dynamics that they're really sick of too, well, that's kind of interesting that my child is proposing that we switch things up. So I'd say all you can do is open the door and walk through yourself, and then say, you want to come with, you know, and then they'll
let you know. Right.
They'll let you know.
It can take courage to open up a difficult conversation with a parent, an adult child, or whomever else, which is a perfect segue into what I'm calling category number 3 in the essentials of becoming the person you want to be: taking risks and being courageous. Listen to how my guest, Don Johnson, a top writer on medium.com, uses a beautiful metaphor for describing a personal risk and act of courage he undertook later in life, which ultimately opened him up to much greater contentment.
In my second marriage, when I realized that I was in something that I didn't really want to be in, and I had to face the fact that I had no idea what was on the other side if I let this thing go. And I was like in my 60s. So I'm in my second marriage. I mean, you know, if people are in their 60s, you're thinking retirement, you're thinking downsizing, you're thinking, you know, let me kind of coast down into the sunset, you know, kind of a thing. Well, I said, I need to pull the plug here, because there's something that is not serving me. It's not, and it's me. There's something that I need to do different here. And when I did that and realized that, boy, there was lots of beliefs. I'm not good enough to have everything I want. You know, I'll settle for second. I'll settle for good enough, not great. You know, these kinds of tapes were running. And when I dealt with those, that's when I became the person I wanted to be. And that opened up the doors to everything that we're doing right here today. You know, those moments, those poignant moments when I had to, you know, like, I'm on the trapeze, I'm swinging on the trapeze, I'm holding on for dear life. And I know that there's another trapeze over there that I need to grab, but I've got to let go of this trapeze I'm on. And that's super scary. And I was scared to death for a long time. And then I got some, you know, serendipitous things happened, and I was able to, like, say, you know what, wait a second, I'm going to let go. I got to grab this other trapeze. And when I grabbed that other trapeze, I had no idea where it was going. None. I just knew that I've got to be deeply truthful to myself and honest with the fact that I know I need something different. I don't know what it is. I'm going to put it out there to the universe, and just, that's all I know. And, you know, the universe answered more quickly than I could have imagined. And Mary Claire showed up, who's my third wife. And that began the chapter that we're in right now, which is, just discovering that the things the things that I thought were super important, like I need so much of this or that, of whatever it was in the world. What started to happen was I actually need less than I ever thought. And more important than anything else is living a life in the pursuit of peace, trying to be more self-aware, more conscious, more intentional, I'm trying to be kinder to myself and to others. Those things that I think I was working on over the years started to just kind of take it to another level. And within all that, realizing I still have so much more to go on that. And that's what I try to do every day. I try to just notice, am I showing up the right way? Am I showing up with kindness and compassion? Am I practicing what I write about? And honestly, sometimes my wife just tells me, she said, "You're not, go read your articles that you're writing."
Right.
And I laugh and I say, "I wrote them, and I said, I wrote the damn things, and she said, "Well, then you better start practicing them, and we laugh and I go, "You're right." And then I just, I step back and I go, you know what? This is if this isn't about life, I don't know what is, where, the learning just doesn't stop. And the journey towards, kind of catching yourself sooner. It's just one of the things I think is a sign of growth is you catch yourself sooner when you go off track. You apologize a little bit quicker and with a little more sincerity when you screw up. And that's how, to me, one of my interpretations of, am I making some nice progress here?
Next up is Jennah-Louise Salkeld. Jennah-Louise is a mindset coach and the host of a wonderful podcast called To Be Human. Listen to Jennah-Louise speak about one of her own big acts of courage and the profound difference it has made in her life. Your podcast is called To Be Human.
Yes.
And how did this get started? Let's start there. How did you decide I'm gonna start a podcast, and what was your thinking going into it?
I love this question. So I started this podcast because I had a deep fear of self-expression. I sort of, we've covered this in our conversation. I grew up only child, very much head in the books and writing. I was a very internal person, so to speak. And sort of over the years, I developed this fear of sharing my thoughts so I could write them down, but in sharing them with other people was something that I was scared of. And I kind of, in starting to do more of this self-development work in mindset coaching over the last few years particularly, I noticed how strong that was still. And there was still that sort of part of me, that investigative journalist part of me from a little girl that just loved having conversations with people and loved learning about people. And this fear was holding me back from doing something that I really, really loved. I was always really good at having one-on-one conversations, sort of intimate conversations, but to put myself out in front of the world in that, I was very afraid of. So during COVID, I sort of had great time for reflection during those couple of years. And I just kind of came to a point where I was like, if I were to get to the end of my life, this would be a regret. Like, This would absolutely be a regret if I did not do this. Like, I feel it. I feel it now. I feel the regret.
Wow. You feel the version of you that didn't go down this path yet.
Yes, I feel on the deathbed being like, should have started that podcast. So I bit the bullet and I started, and I would say at least for the first 10 episodes, like I was so afraid before every episode. I could feel like my heart beating. I was like anxious. And like it was a real personal journey for me to move through, and a very exposing one, because it wasn't like I was doing this behind closed doors. These things are recordings that are out sort of on YouTube and Apple and Spotify. But I've done, I think, just over 70 now, and
It's incredible.
it's beautiful. Like, I honestly, Eric, like I have moments where I'm like, thank you, Jennah-Louise. Like, thank you for doing that. I'm so grateful that you just, that first day you had the courage, like you showed up, you press record, you published it. And now you're at over 70, and it's like I see myself continuing for years to come. And I think it's a beautiful story in that. I think sometimes, you know, particularly with podcasting, for example, people that are listeners, they almost put you on a pedestal to some extent. You know, you're the podcast host, but you know, I'm so passionate. This is part of the podcast, is like just humanizing people and being able to be like, yeah, I have a podcast. I've interviewed all these amazing people and I will continue to, but like, I'm on the other side of this, having my own personal experience of growth in being comfortable in sharing who I am and what I'm curious about, and asking questions and sharing my life. I think it's just been such a beautiful part of my journey that I'm so grateful for.
Finally, we wrap up this category with an excerpt from my conversation with renowned creativity coach, Eric Maisel. Eric has written and published over 50 books on subjects such as creativity, mental health, and life purpose and meaning making. Listen to what Eric has to say about permission to make mistakes and messes, and about choosing to matter, both of which involve risk-taking and courage.
Kids have permission to make creative mistakes and messes till they're about 3.5, so to speak. After that, they're supposed to draw inside the lines, know the answers for tests, etc. Do well on the piano recital, all that stuff. One of the central keys to enrichment, or to creativity, or to producing interesting stuff, is having lifelong permission to make mistakes and messes. Few people have that. Most of my clients have to be reminded again and again and again that the creative process demands a respect for mistakes and messes, and that they have to move in an everyday way from their ordinary mind, which demands that they get things right, appropriately enough. You want to drive on the correct side of the road. You want to remember to keep your kids at 3. You want to get things right. But there has to come a time where you don't have to get things right. And for most people, they don't know how to make that transition. They don't know to make that transition. And even if they know to make it, they don't know how to make that transition to a mindset where they're allowed to spend 2 years on a novel that doesn't work. Most people do not have that permission to spend 2 years on a novel that doesn't work and then follow it up with another novel that doesn't work. Maybe it's their third novel that's good. Few people want to hear this or can tolerate it. Few people can tolerate writing 2 bad novels in search of their third good novel. These are the sorts of things that matter when it comes to a person's ability to create and to create a body of work.
In your work, you affirm people, you suggest that people affirm for themselves that they matter. There's no objective evidence to suggest that any of us matter in any significant cosmic way. And so you are a big advocate of not just artists, but people in general, affirming themselves and taking their lives seriously and telling themselves that they matter, because that's how you're going to get the best out of yourself. And why not?
It's the only way you make yourself proud. We have forgotten that we have our own requirements of ourselves. We want to make ourselves proud. We don't want to live a frightened, wimpy, scared, diminished life. It's not something we want for ourselves. That's not to say we may not do it. We may do those things that we're not wanting to do for all kinds of reasons, what Freud called secondary gain reasons, things that we don't even understand, reasons we don't even understand exist in the equation, but it's not making us happy. The only thing by the way, happiness is not the goal. I think making ourselves proud by our efforts is in fact the goal. That's what we're after in life, to make ourselves proud.
I love that. And I think a lot of us probably have the sense that, oh, if we make other people proud, then we'll feel proud. But at some point, a lot of us discover that those two do not necessarily equate. Maybe they happily overlap in some instances, but they're not one and the same.
That's right. And if you grow up in most cultures, they don't overlap, because most cultures are reactionary, conservative with a small c, rule-bound, secret-bound, hide-bound. And if you're going to please those people, you're not going to be living a life of individuality or authenticity.
I love those words. Making ourselves proud by our efforts is, in fact, the goal. That's what we're after in life, making ourselves proud. Moving on to category number 4 for becoming the person you want to be, finding purpose through your pain. Here are sisters Karissa and Sherise Schlaht, who co-host a podcast called Between Us, which calls attention to the things that connect us as human beings, including our pain and struggles.
In stepping into this place in my life where I have the safety, but also the confidence in myself to be sharing the parts that are harder to share, there is also a silver lining to that. So while there was, components of our upbringing that were challenging, I actually think the foundation that my community gave me, the values of integrity and loyalty, they're at the core of everything that I do. And I actually think they propel me forward. So as much as there was some pain, it's like I found a way to use that pain as a purpose. And it is like a fuel now, a hunger that I cannot satiate, because it gives me purpose for what I am here to do while I'm on this planet.
Yeah, and I also want to say thank you for picking up on your concept of the purpose of our podcast. And honestly, exactly what you stated succinctly summates my entire mission in life.
Wow.
Is exactly that. And, I've been a person of the mental health system since I was 16. And so I began an inpatient treatment I had anorexia nervosa, and it was severe. So hospitalization started at 16 for me. And so 6 years of inpatient treatment between psychiatric institutions and then inpatient hospitalizations. But exactly the moment I had in those darkest, loneliest moments was I never want someone to feel this alone. And so that pain turned into being my whole mission in life is if I can bring some sort of solace or even just meet someone there, that is entirely my purpose. Yeah. So thank you for picking up on that. And I would agree with what Karissa said too, that the foundational aspects of, loyalty versus independence, but having that loyalty and those integrity values and being an honest person, that's definitely what's helped me, I guess, given me any sort of success that I've had in life. It's probably from the same thing, those foundational values. So I agree with you there too, Karissa. Yeah.
And what's interesting is, so Sherise and I have alluded to struggles, but haven't said too much. So what's interesting is when I was struggling, I also turned to an eating disorder to cope. And yet neither of us knew each other had an eating disorder at the time when we were experiencing it. So I would say for me, a shift happened when I went through puberty, and how the world perceived me, compliments about my talents and intellect started to shift more towards my physical appearance, what a beautiful young woman I was becoming. And so I internalized that my value to others and my identity was based on my looks. And so I became very acutely aware of how others were perceiving me, what I was wearing, my body weight, etc. And when my boyfriend at the time made a comment about another girl in our school being fat, I would have compared my body to be very similar to hers. And so I realized, okay, I need to do something to control this. I had no access to things like dietitians or a healthy way to stay well and whatever. And so I basically restricted myself to 500 calories a day. I ran every night after school. And at some point, that no longer became sustainable. And so I turned to bulimia to then get rid of food so that I wasn't gaining weight. So I became bulimic at the age of 15, but kept it very secret, kept it very hidden. When I moved away from the small community that we grew up in to go to university, I met my now husband, Steve. And I was able to get out of the relationship that I was in, which was abusive. And I recognize now a lot of that abuse was his own pain and hurt, and he hadn't done the work on himself to heal himself from that pain. But when I left that relationship and was with my now husband, Steve, I think it gave me he's a very calm, stable, loving, like unconditionally loving person. And so when I had, I think, the stability of his love, knowing that it wasn't dependent on me needing to be or do anything other than be myself, it freed me from some of the cages I had created for myself. And so I was able to overcome the eating disorder without any intervention, which I'm so thankful for. Although I do think it kind of shifted from an addiction to food to drinking while in university to becoming a workaholic when I started my career. And so it did kind of shift, but I think it got progressively a little bit healthier each time. And now with, over a decade of counseling, having close relationships in my life with people who are loving and having the freedom to express myself, not only in my professional career, but also in my personal life, has allowed me to slowly unlock all of the cages that I had been in.
Next is a clip from my conversation with author, teacher, and spiritual seeker, Mark Matousek, on the subject of allowing hardship to transform us. This is from the introduction of your book, When You're Falling, Dive. Here we go. You write, while hardship can certainly render us bitter, selfish, defensive, and miserable, it can also be used quite differently as the artery of interconnection, a bridge to other people in pain, as blood in the muscle that propels us. Crisis takes us to the brink of our limits and forces us to keep moving forward. When people in extremis call it a blessing, this is the paradox they are describing. This paradox is hard to swallow. When I used to tell friends half-jokingly that HIV had actually saved my life, they rarely understood what I meant. I wasn't promoting an awful virus or claiming I was glad to have it. I wasn't pretending to be overjoyed by the prospect of an early departure. I was simply confessing an odd bit of truth that I wouldn't have believed myself had my own life not improved so dramatically. Without the threat of mortal loss, I would never have had the conviction, the fuel to become the person I wanted to be, or to find my way through terrible dread to something stronger than fear. Wow. Wow. So my first question after reading that is what is stronger than fear?
Presence. Understanding and wisdom and presence are stronger than fear. Self-awareness, when we get to come to know what we actually are, is much, much stronger than fear. And for me, it was tapping into the spirituals, tapping into something larger than myself. It was much, much, much bigger than my fear. When you realize that your fear of mortality, for example, is a universal phenomenon, it stops being such a personal thing. And when you practice self-inquiry, which is my primary, interest, you start to say, what is this fear? Who is afraid? What is that thing afraid of? You start to look at it closer, you realize that it's an illusion. And that's the great beauty of it. So I have become somebody, I'm not fear-free. By the way, fearlessness isn't the lack of fear, it's
Doing
being
in spite
big
of
enough
fear.
for fear to be there and not be stopped by it.
Yeah.
That's my definition of fearlessness. So I am not fearless, but I'm a lot less fearful than I used to be. And I'm not as afraid of what people think. And I'm not trying to kind of measure myself by external standards, which is also a beauty of getting older. I just turned 65. And one of the great things about getting older is things that mattered in the past just don't matter. You don't have the time, you don't have the energy, frankly, you don't have the interest. And life gets much simpler and it gets a lot better. So what I would say to people is, as you get older, really take the spiritual path seriously, because you need it more and more and more as the older you get. And it also, by the way, brings joy. It brings self-awareness, and it brings the ability to connect to people without so much interference, without so much ego defensiveness and projection and protectiveness. So that's my rally call for spiritual seeking, because it really did change my experience of being alive.
One more clip related to this subject of finding purpose through our pain. I had a conversation with Nicole Angelique Kerr, who sustained myriad physical and emotional traumas after a horrific car crash when she was 19. Her memories of what happened to her during the accident did not resurface until 19 years later, but when they did, they were profound. Her recently published memoir is entitled "You Are Deathless: A Near-Death Experience Taught Me How to Fully Live and Not Fear Death." Here's Nicole.
I will tell you, because my memory didn't come back for 19 years, I just got on with life with that motto of no pain, no gain, and all that, and was just pushing myself, trying to achieve, trying to become independent, trying to act like nothing happened to me, like pushing it away and getting on, going back to school, getting, a great job with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. And I went into public health and nutrition, and I just was pushing myself. I completely shut all my feelings down. Wow. And I was just operating from my head. And I developed an eating disorder the year after the accident, which there wasn't even, just starting to come out as an issue, eating disorders. And so it took me almost 40 years to really undo the whole eating disorder.
Wow.
I was just in so much pain, and my parents, my mother in particular, had told the doctor when he said Nicole needs some mental health. She said, no, God and Jesus are our psychiatrist, and they will help Nicole. And she was just wrong about that. I needed mental health, and I didn't get diagnosed with PTSD until 2 years ago. I got labeled depressive, I got labeled anxiety, I got labeled all these other things, but nothing ever worked. And, and when the doctor went through the evaluation with the VA, they're like, how could they have missed this? And I said, I don't know, but a lot of that kind of stuff happens, but that's exactly what I've lived. I had a head injury, I went unconscious for 12 hours. That is a moderate traumatic brain injury that qualifies for that. But they didn't know about that back then, so they were like, well, her skull's intact, her brain seems to be intact, we're going to work on these other areas, so I just went on with life. And then I started I went into counseling myself. I put myself through therapy and started going to compulsive overeater 12-step programs, trying to find an answer to why I couldn't stop binge eating. And then I developed other issues as well. But when my memory came back, that was crucial. My chiropractor, Dr. West, and he told me that there were repressed memories coming up. And I said, why now? And he said, because your body feels safe, and the body holds the answers. The Body Keeps the Score is an excellent book on trauma. And it it remembers. So I believe if you've been traumatized and it is for your highest and greatest good or someone else's highest and greatest good, that it will be revealed in your body when you feel safe enough. I had been doing work, transformational work, like seeing a therapist, seeing a chiropractor, doing all this stuff on my own for years. And I really believed it was then that my body was like, you're ready to handle the truth about your accident. The rest of the memory came the next day about me actually crossing over to the other side. A spirit, I called it like Casper the ghost, but I now know it was my angel, my grandfather on my dad's side, James Kerr. And that only came to me 3 or 4 weeks ago. This has been after the book published. But I always, and I wrote in the book, it was a male. I knew it was male, and I knew, I just knew certain things, but I just never could put that together. And what is so interesting is I am 58 years old, and my grandfather died at age 58 years old from a heart attack. And that has something to do with it. I don't know exactly what, but there's a reason he let me know at this age when he passed that he was the one that came down and lifted me up and took me to this plane. And so my spirit soul left my body before I crashed down.
The fifth and final category of interview clips I have culled for you here from season 1, I am calling Tips for Accessing Your Best Self and Best Life. We start with a favorite guitar player of mine, Andy Timmons, known across the world for his incredible technique, electric guitar tone, and melodic sense. Andy spoke with me about the importance of accepting your own unique gifts and not comparing them to others.
Any of us that have been on a path of any kind of artistic endeavors, anything where, there's a lot of other people doing similar things or things, that you would like to achieve, I think we can easily fall prey to, comparison and competition. Not that I ever felt that I was competitive, but it was easy to be at the same time inspired, but also like intimidated or to feel less than, right? No matter what level I would ever get to, that other people might view me a certain way of like, wow, you're a really great guitar player. Well, I never felt that way. I knew certainly that I would have certain things that were my strengths, but it was just kind of realizing that I'll never be Alan Holdsworth or Eric Johnson or insert your, ultimate hero here, but you don't need to be. Okay, those guys are the best ones of those that need be,
You don't have to be them, and even if you wanted to, you couldn't be, so you might as well shine your light, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that's the thing for all of us, it's just kind of, sometimes you don't even know what that light is or what it looks like. And I had somebody say that to me, gosh, it was the early 80s, and I guess I started in my first band in 76. I was 13, and so I was always playing live from 13 on. And then when it came time for my third year of college, I went down to the University of Miami, and I'd already studied classical, and I was learning about jazz. Now I'm a jazz major, and I come back. I had this really good friend of mine, Troy Wright, that was always a good musical friend and played guitar. And we were just playing together, and he goes, "I wish you could hear you." And it was a really deep thing to say. And, I think back on that moment every now and then, realize that, sometimes we really don't get to hear ourselves the way other people do, right? Because we're so inside of it. We might hear it back, obviously, on a recording or whatever, but still in that moment, it's not the same perception that you have that other people do. And obviously, just the more that we let go of our idea of whatever that is, then eventually, I think just by doing it consistently, it's inevitable that you're going to sound like you, right? There's the physiology, there's all the things that we collect, all of our favorite players, all the favorite music. It's like you're a collector. You're editing all these things, and somehow when you're making music, it's going to come out as you. Sometimes because of your limitations. That was the thing Mike Stern said to me once, is like, our limitations is what kind of create our style. It's at the age of creeping up on 59, I'm starting to get comfortable with actually being myself.
Here's another musician, Steve Lungrin, aka Piano Man Steve, who offers up a theory about getting good at something, and also an important question to use as a litmus test for decision making.
This is going to sound crazy, but stick with me for a minute. I'm not even sure if I believe in innate talent as much as I believe in the concept of belief and resistance. And so to me, the way I look at it is in every single component of your life, there's a scale, like a bell curve, that you have either a belief and a resistance to. And there are some things that you come out of the chute without very much resistance to, leaving yourself the open belief that you can do it. And if you have that, you'll be able to gain the capacity, because you don't hold yourself back from picking up, that the person with that open mind in that area, no matter, whether they can, if they listen to an audio or they read a book or whatever on the subject, even if most of it's over their head, whatever can get through gets through, and then they pick up on that, and then they build on that, and it's kind of an effortless journey. If you have resistance to it for whatever reason, which those are beliefs that could be trained into you from the time you're a kid. You can just be indoctrinated into a sense that you're not capable of this or that or this or that. And if you have that, it becomes I think it's still possible for you to learn these things, but you've got a lot more to overcome, because you've got a bunch of bullshit that you're telling yourself all the time that you have to talk yourself out of. And that's really that's the thing. It's not talent that you're lacking. It's that, because like I said, to me, if you don't have resistance, then you don't have a problem being bad at it until you're good. If you have a lot of resistance, then you can't stomach how bad it feels to be bad at it for a while. And that's the real difference. And I think that we look at the people and say, oh, they have innate talent at this because their whole life they've been good at this. And I say, well, to me, that's just somebody who, as a kid, they didn't have any reason to believe they couldn't do that, and they were interested in it. So they got better at it because they liked it, And so I don't know whether that's true, but that is how I look at the world. And I absolutely believe that if you really want something, part of that, that ambition will help you lower that resistance threshold. And as you do, the lower your resistance gets, the more naturally, it's like if you think of a baby comes out of the womb and doesn't have any preconceived notions of anything, the baby has no reason to believe it can't do anything. It's taught that it can't do something. So, the more you want it, the more you have to let go of that resistance. And as you do, your natural belief in yourself rises. I don't want to get into too much mysticism here, but it's like there's something bigger out there that knows more than I do from my perspective that is moving these checkers around. And I get to decide, I have a big role in it. It's not all fatalistic, but I'm just saying that there's so many more opportunities available than what I can see from here. So it's really important that it's like, if I have a good idea and I think, here's a particularly good outcome that could come from this, and that's enough to spur me into following the impulse, that's great. But try to think of it always as, here's something good that could happen from it, but maybe something even better could happen from it. Maybe nothing would happen from it, but so I always look at it from this one perspective. Will I enjoy doing it? Because then the time won't be wasted no matter what. Okay? You are not going to be on your deathbed regretting times that you enjoyed yourself. You will not. I promise you won't look back and say, oh, I really wish I had spent less time enjoying myself. That's not how it's going to be. So this won't be wasted time if I'm going to enjoy what it is that I'm going to do. If it turns out good in the way I think it might, then great. If it turns out good in a way I didn't anticipate, great, maybe even greater. And if nothing comes of it other than I enjoyed the time I put into that, I'm not
Still
out
win.
anything. And that's kind of how I would approach these things. But just always keep that open mind, because I can tell you a lot of stories from my life where the thing that happened was way better than what I had envisioned.
Next, we have a clip of my conversation with Nicole Bitar. Kara achieved great outward success for herself as a corporate attorney, only to find that it made her deeply miserable on the inside. Through a difficult and painful process of transition, she eventually pivoted into an entirely different occupation, teaching Kundalini yoga and offering her services as an optimization coach. Listen to Kara talk about the difference between hard work versus effort, conviction, and commitment. What was your experience like at law school?
So it was okay. Like I wasn't that interested in what we were doing, which should have been a sign, you know, but that was never the thing for me. My life wasn't about what feels good to you. What do you like doing? My life was about discipline. My life was about hard work. And it was about doing things that I didn't want to do because like, I had this notion of, well, I am not in and of myself innately good, right? I am not worthy. I'm not valuable. So it's like, well, I've got to fix this. So this isn't about what I want. This isn't about what feels good to me. This isn't about what's interesting to me. This is about, so, and again, subconscious, but yeah.
When you answered that question, I had this like vision in my mind of, you've completed your life and you're now like on the other side, however you want to imagine that, right? And you're being asked, so, how was your life? You're done, you did it, you completed it. And I just have this vision of young Kara saying, it's okay. It's like, and I say this as a joke, but how many people, really, honestly, how many people would say that?
So that's the thing. I think a lot.
Yeah, it was okay. It was good. It was okay.
Yeah.
It was all right. And what a shame. Well, I mean,
I so agree with you. What an absolute travesty that we're doing this. And the thing is, I know I'm not the only person who's done this.
Yeah.
I know I'm not.
And it's a testament to how much of a hold this had on you, these expectations, right? And this, because you were all along the way having to suppress anything that contradicted them. And it was all just about endurance, right? Like you're going to get through this, and your opinion or feelings don't really matter. It's the end goal, and you have to redeem yourself because you're inherently flawed. And, the word you used was you have to fix yourself.
Yeah.
And that, like you were broken and you needed to repair that. And you needed to make sure that you, forget about any even afterlife implications of this, but just like this is your experience of yourself. But you did somehow, right? You got through law school relatively unscathed, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I was really good at putting my head down and doing things that I didn't want to do, and I was disciplined, and I knew how to work hard, and I had this like, if I work hard enough, I will get it done, and I did. I got it done.
To be clear, that's not all a bad thing, right? Like those are very valuable skills to have.
Yeah.
Right. The ability to work hard, the ability to focus and self-discipline, these are all good things. It's just that they can be put in service of something that is, this could be in service of something that supports your soul and your life's journey, or maybe doesn't.
Yeah. So I agree with that. And I would like to make a distinction. So I do believe commitment and conviction are really, I would say, necessary things to have. If you really want to, listen, we do have goals. We do have paths. We do have purposes. We do have things that we want to do. It does take conviction, and it does take commitment, and it does take effort. And it takes, standing in front of challenges and being willing to stand in front of those challenges and rise to them. And so I did have this in me, and I have used it since that point in time to now get me to where I'm currently at. What I would offer, though, the hard work thing, though, I do like to make a distinction between hard work and effort, between hard work and rising to challenges, between hard work and conviction and commitment. Because when the way I define hard work, at least, is it's like if you're doing hard work, like, so for me, I worked hard my whole life only to get to become an attorney and work harder than I ever knew I could work. And the reason for that was because I was choosing hard work. And so no matter what I did, I was just going to get more hard work. And so people don't realize this in a sense, like if I work hard, then I'll get this goal that I want. And there is a distinction in my mind, at least, between hard work and effort, which is hard work depletes us. When we're putting forth effort from a place of conviction and commitment towards the truth of who we are, towards what we are passionate about in life, towards, expressing our own creativity, we're actually energized by it. But when we put forth hard work, it's like it depletes us. And so as I'm going along in my whole life, it's like, yes, there are these underlying characteristics that I would say are, good things to have or beneficial things to have. But one of the things that I was doing is I was just I was working hard and it was just depleting, as opposed to what I've realized what I do now is I put forth a lot of effort, but it actually energizes me. Why? Because it's me expressing the truth of who I am. So there's like a distinction there that in my mind that I see.
That is so beautifully put. Really, thank you for that. And lastly, for this category, tips for accessing your best self and best life, I offer this clip from my conversation with philosophy professor and author Scott Samuelson, in which he shares how a friend of his exemplified to him what it means to live a good life.
And then, of course, the beauty of philosophy to me as well is that it is a way of life. And so, I keep thinking about what it means to, just to live a good life. A good friend of mine who's a jazz musician and composer actually just died last summer, fairly young. And he had been given a terminal cancer diagnosis and had about a year to live, and lived a little longer, but not too much longer. And I so admired, and he was a very kind of philosophical character in his own right. And I so admired how he kind of, lived out his last days that, it reminded me too of I want to live like the kind of example he set. And that to me is what, part of what a philosopher can do.
I know you posed that question to your students, the what if you had 1 year to live question.
Mm-hmm.
How did your jazz musician friend choose to live out his last year?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, what's really powerful about his name was John Rapson, about him is, so, when he first got the diagnosis, he had a bit of the seize the day mentality of we're going to go on a big trip. And, he and his wife, went out and did some stuff. But he said to me, he was like, I got sick of the seize the day stuff at some point. He's like, I just want to get back to work and seeing my friends. And I think what he kind of realized is that because he'd been such a thoughtful person about how he lived, that he was already living a very good life. And he just really just savored it more and more. There's this old Stoic adage that's something like that sometimes put under an image, and this adage goes, "Let them perish so that I not perish," and it's showing people basically on a boat that is in a storm, and they're throwing all the so-called precious cargo overboard to keep the boat alive. And I take it that what the Stoics meant by that was that a lot of what you think is precious is actually not that important, and you can toss that aside, and what you got to get to is what is really important, and keep that close to you. And I feel like that's what he had done. He had found work that he loved. He was a composer and musician, and he was just devoted to that. He was a great teacher who really made a difference in people's lives. He had just a curiosity about almost everyone he met, and he cultivated friendships and had, a great sense of humor. And I think that, what he kind of realized in the face of death was that he had kind of thrown overboard the things that didn't matter all that much. And he really did have what he needed on his boat, so to speak. And then he just really savored those things. So anyway, that to me is a kind of model of living well that I think can come from someone who has thoughtfully considered what's important and what isn't, and then tries to live it out.
Before I wrap this up, I want to thank all of my guests for these amazing conversations. And of course, my heartfelt thanks to all of you who have listened to or viewed this podcast. I hope you have found some valuable insights and inspiration here. And I'd like to remind you that there's much more depth in the full-length version of each one of these interviews. You can explore or revisit those in the previous 17 episodes of this show. You can also learn more about each guest and their inspiring work in the show notes that accompany each of those episodes. I'm going to close this episode the same way I opened it, with a clip from my interview with Merle Saferstein. Merle is the author of Living and Leaving My Legacy, Volume 1, which was published earlier this year, and which incorporates entries from over 40 years worth of her personal journals. It's a remarkable document from a remarkable woman. Here's our last clip. I want to end this, if I can, by reading just a very short passage from the book. So it's a journal entry of yours dated September 27th, 2001. Significant, if only in and of itself, because it's so soon after 9/11. But I just want to read this back to you and see how it sits with you. You wrote, "If I were a rabbi giving a sermon today, I would talk about how to live life so as not to fear, live life to its fullest, make each day count, do for others, ensure I am living my passion, and connect with others. This is much of what matters most to me."
Oh. I hardly even remember writing that. I do remember, though, that I came home that day and I was frustrated because I think the sermon was political and it was one of the Jewish holidays, one of the high holidays. And I felt like, talk about the things that touch our soul. And so that's where that came from. I don't know that I would add much more. I think that pretty much sums up the way I believe and the way I live my life.
That's it for season 1 of The Person You Want to Be. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do me a favor and let others know about the show. You can also rate and leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts, give the show a rating on Spotify, and or subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is simply my name, Eric Teplitz. You can also give a thumbs up and or leave a comment underneath this or any of the individual episodes on YouTube. To help you become the person you want to be, I have created an online course called Opening to Greater Possibilities. And I also offer one-on-one coaching. You can learn more about each of these, access a ton of free content, or contact me directly via my personal website, which is Eric Teplitz, EricTeplitz.com. Thank you, and I look forward to creating and sharing more episodes with you beginning sometime in 2023. Stay tuned for season 2, And in the meantime, take care of yourself, be kind, and make the most of what the poet Mary Oliver calls your one wild and precious life.